So lately in the comments section, I've noticed that there's a little bit of confusion as to what can go into the Hasbro universe. I've seen comments of people saying like, Godzilla should be part of the Hasbro universe, or Power Rangers. I actually got an email talking about Power Rangers and how it should be in the Hasbro universe because they're owned by Hasbro. Here's the thing, the Hasbro universe is a bad name for... The Hasbro universe is not a universe of Hasbro, solely Hasbro properties, and all-inclusive Hasbro properties. The Hasbro universe comes from a very specific corner of Hasbro's ownership, of Hasbro's franchises. And frankly, I think the reason it's called the Hasbro Universe is because Hasbro Universe is a lot more marketable than what is essentially a G.I. Joe extended universe. Because a lot of people don't really know the history of franchises like the Transformers, I think people don't understand how the Hasbro Universe is and always has been just an extended G.I. Joe universe. And I'm going to show you how the reason why these different franchises are put together in the Hasbro universe. Well, stuff that, for example, when IDW did their Hasbro universe, there were still books that were licensed by Hasbro that were not part of the Hasbro universe. Stuff like My Little Pony and Dungeons and Dragons. But it's because the Hasbro universe is really a really big family tree. So this video is going to explain why some stuff is in the Hasbro universe and why some stuff isn't. And we're actually going to do it with a chart. Trial period expired. You don't decide when the trial period ends. I do. So this all starts after World War II, during the Cold War, with what would be retroactively known as G.I. Joe Adventure Team. In the public consciousness, when people say G.I. Joe, they think of the male version of Barbie dolls. And that essentially was what G.I. Joe was, up until it sort of changed into the G.I. Joe vs. Cobra series we know today. G.I. Joe, a real American hero. But before that, just G.I. Joe was essentially these, 12-inch dolls? But retroactively, they've been called the Adventure Team because the characters in that toy line were retroactively made part of G.I. Joe fiction under the name of the Adventure Team, and so we'll write Adventure Team here, though what we're referring to is the very first G.I. Joe. Now, two things came out of that. Where's my pen? One, very obviously, you could assume that G.I. Joe, a real American hero, comes from this. And by a real American hero, I don't necessarily mean the fiction titled A Real American Hero, but I mean that era of G.I. Joe where they're fighting Cobra, and they're not 12-inch dolls anymore, but like little action figures. So naturally, that's a descendant of the G.I. Joe Adventure Team. Some people don't know that Transformers is a spin-off of G.I. Joe. And I think it's because Transformers sometimes feels like it has nothing to do with G.I. Joe, even though thematically they're identical. It's just Transformers is with robots instead of humans. And Transformers has overshadowed G.I. Joe, but the fact of the matter is Transformers is a G.I. Joe spin-off. G.I. Joe, the Adventure Team, the original 80s dolls, went to Japan, and Japan rebranded them as Henshin Cyborg. Henshin Cyborg eventually got miniaturized because Japanese homes are smaller and there was an energy crisis. I have a video on this, by the way. Look up for Transformers Lore 101. But Henshin Cyborg became Microman, and eventually they make vehicles for Microman, and that sparks the Diaclone line, which, when Diaclone comes to the United States, along with a few other robot car-changing franchises, they make it into the Transformers. So Transformers is a descendant of G.I. Joe. And I'm going to go ahead and circle in or underline in red the franchises that have been put into the IDW universe. Not IDW, Hasbro universe. So what about the other franchises that are in the Hasbro universe? Well, we have Micronauts, and Micronauts is just Microman after it was brought to the United States. It was renamed Micronauts. So it's part of the G.I. Joe family tree too. I should note that Beast Wars came out of Transformers, because Beast Wars plays a role in the Hasbro universe. So even before we get into G.I. Joe's little sequels from the 90s, when G.I. Joe came to the United Kingdom, it was rebranded as Action Man, as the Action Man franchise, which later turned into the Action Force franchise. So Action Man is where you get characters like Action Man from, and then Action Force eventually spawned out of that as it slowly gets more into a Real American Hero territory. I'm not sure if the line should be coming out of a Real American Hero or out of Adventure Team, because Action Force starts off unique out of Action Man, but then slowly becomes just the British version of a Real American Hero. But Action Man's where you get stuff like Action Man. Action Force is where you get characters like Baron Ironblood, who play a big role in the Hasbro universe. I should mention that when Hasbro bought the rights to ROM, or really when whoever was running Action Man, Powell something, I can't remember off the top of my head, but ROM eventually gets bought in by, I think, Hasbro, and then ROM in Britain gets reincorporated into Action Man, so ROM really comes out of Action Man when we're talking about the Hasbro universe. Another franchise that Hasbro buys is M.A.S.K, Mobile Armored Strike Command. And when Hasbro buys M.A.S.K, they reincorporate the characters into G.I. Joe, because frankly a lot of it's similar to G.I. Joe, which makes M.A.S.K part of the G.I. Joe sphere. Even though they didn't have their own line in the IDW universe, there is the Inhumanoids, which includes that was always from the get-go part of G.I. Joe. It includes one of the G.I. Joe characters as one of the major characters in Inhumanoids, at least in the first cartoon. And now with the current Hasbro universe that's on its death throes, you have Inhumanoids characters popping up in ROM Dire Wraiths. So Inhumanoids was always part of the Hasbro universe. Speaking of always part of the Hasbro universe, we have Jem and the Holograms. And Jem and the Holograms basically included Hector Ramirez. And Hector Ramirez sort of combined the Sunbow Hasbro universe. And IDW decided to continue that trend. The Jem and the Holograms comics are not part of the Hasbro universe, but the franchise Jem and the Holograms as characters do exist in the Hasbro universe, because their original source material, the cartoon, was part of the Sunbow universe with G.I. Joe and Transformers. And then we can mention the sequels to G.I. Joe from the 90s, G.I. Joe Extreme, and Sergeant Savage and the Screaming Eagles. Is that all? Adventure Team, Transformers, Beast Wars, G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe Extreme, Sergeant Savage, Action Man, Adventure Team, Action Force, Micronauts, M.A.S.K, Jem and the Holograms, Ramen, and Humanoids. These were the major players in the previous IDW Hasbro universe. Hey, future Radix here to say that I missed one, the Visionaries. Now, the Visionaries is sort of an interesting case. They are very tangential to the rest of the Hasbro universe, but they do fall into that extended family tree. Though the Visionaries came about at the same time as G.I. Joe and Transformers, they were very similar in theme, and they even had the same toy to comic to cartoon strategy that Hasbro was using at the time. The thing is, the original Visionaries cartoon and comic were not part of their respective Hasbro universes. One thing I don't really point out here is that there were, at the very onset of stuff like Transformers, they were already part of a Hasbro universe. There was a Hasbro universe published by Marvel with Transformers and G.I. Joe, and then there was a cartoon Sunbow Hasbro universe, which was based around the cartoons. Now, Visionaries had a small short cartoon and short comic series, but they were not part, or at least not shown to be part of those two universes. However, Visionaries was published as back matter to the Transformers comics and sort of became part of that zeitgeist. And because they're so thematically similar to Transformers and G.I. Joe, they sort of fall in that category as well. And it makes sense for them to be in the Hasbro universe. Now, there's another tier of Hasbro properties that can be put in the Hasbro universe, as seen from the previous IDW universe, and that is minor Hasbro properties that Hasbro really can't do anything independently with on their own. Army Ants. What was it? Airlanders? Pound Puppies. Stuff nobody cares about anymore. They can be thrown into the Hasbro universe as just little quick references, not any major players. But the major players are these guys. Now, there is the Clue comic And that gets a bit iffy, but that was never really marketed as a actual main part of the Hasbro universe, but I think it is part of the Hasbro universe, but almost tongue-in-cheek. But the point I'm trying to make here is, I see a lot of comments saying, oh, let's stick so-and-so Hasbro property into the Hasbro universe. That's not really how it works. The Hasbro universe isn't a Hasbro universe. It's really a G.I. Joe expanded universe. It has to have some sort of relation to G.I. Joe, even if it's like a weird cousin. For example, Gem and the Holograms, I believe, is the furthest away from the original G.I. Joe Adventure Team. But really, it is one big G.I. Joe share universe. I do intend on making a video in the future talking about why my series on YouTube is called Transformers Lore, when really that's not what it is. It's about the larger universe. But we'll get to that video when we get to that video. But I hope this explains to you guys what the Hasbro universe is. You can't really say, oh, they should put Power Rangers in it, because Power Rangers has nothing to do with it. What you could say they should bring in are other properties that were part of previous Hasbro universes, such as there was a series called COPS, which was an acronym, that was a far future sequel to G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero. It was in that cartoon universe. COPS hasn't really had a resurgence, and I hope it does, and I hope it gets reincorporated into the Hasbro universe as it originally was, as a future sequel to G.I. Joe. Inhumanoids is one that really popped up only recently with Rom Dire Wraiths. But, yeah. But I hope you get the point. I hope you understand what I'm talking about here, about how the Hasbro universe works, what it actually is. Frankly, a lot of people say, like, oh, the Hasbro universe just brought a lot of random franchises together and put them into one. These always had some sort of thread connecting them. They were always related in some way, because at the end of the day, all of these are pretty much just toy lines that are branches off of the original G.I. Joe Adventure Team line. But anyway, subscribe to this channel if you have not yet for more nerdy stuff like this. So consider supporting me on Patreon if you like this channel and want to support it. Check out my social media links in the description, and have a good day, ladies and gentlemen. Huge thanks to our patrons, including this month's $10 plus patron, Josh Adkins. Check out the description for more patrons and more info about how you can receive a shout out here.